Yes, sirree. It is Kenneth the K-Rock Klein hosting the new episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. And I gotta tell you what, folks, we got a real interesting show for you this time around. I am really looking forward to talking about this episode where we're gonna be getting into my season predictions for the upcoming NFL season. That's right, folks. I'm gonna be picking out my predictions as far as the teams that I truly believe will be a contender to make the playoffs or who will win each division. In fact, I'm actually going to be picking two teams from each division as teams that I could see winning and also that I could see making the playoffs at least. So we're going to be talking about that, just giving out my fair share of who I think is going to win each division and what team could also win the division as well. Then I'm going to be giving out my predictions for season awards. So just kind of getting excited to be talking about that as well. I'm going to be giving out my predictions for MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Offensive Rookie, Defensive Rookie, and all that. And then, of course, the Comeback Player of the Year. So I'm going to be talking about all that as well. And then, folks, I'm going to be talking about, I'm actually going to be kind of inclining my bold predictions. So I have 5 bold predictions, but some of them you might hear based on this prediction episode as well. So I got 5 good ones here. You guys might call me crazy for these, but you never know. We'll have to wait and see. But first, folks, I wanted to take a moment to think back to my childhood. I played a lot of video games or computer games as well. I mean, I wasn't really like a pro at it, but I did play my fair share of Madden. I played NBA, Jam, and all that. I did a little Call of Duty if you want to go anti-sports and everything, but I was mostly a sports video game, I wouldn't say expert, but I was a sports video game kind of junkie, if you will. There was baseball, basketball, football, and a little bit of boxing I might throw in there, and even hockey as well. I don't want to forget about hockey. But I definitely enjoyed playing video games growing up, and even some golf too. I'll throw in golf as well. But there was one special group of games that I played, and that, of course, was the backyard sports games. Now, for those of you that probably weren't around as a 90s or 2000s kid, some people that were very younger than I am, backyard sports is basically where they basically make it like a sports league where they create all these characters from kids around the neighborhood, like your typical neighborhood, whether, growing up playing sports with your friends and everything. And they basically have it to where you could play football, you could play baseball, basketball, hockey, soccer, and throw in a little skateboarding there. But I was never really a skateboarding junkie in that regard. So you can throw in all those sports in there as well. And they take all these kids, and they also had like kid versions of professional athletes. So like in baseball, you had Ken Griffey Jr., I think, or Randy Johnson. In basketball, it was Kevin Garnett and Lisa Leslie. And then I think Jerry Rice had a kid version of himself in the football game. So yeah, and even in hockey, Mike Modano. So those were the 4 games I do remember playing, even though I know there are 6 versions of it. But I used to love playing those backyard sports games. I used to be a fan of like Pablo Sanchez, Pete Wheeler, Kenny Gawaguchi, or Mikey Thomas, and then trying to think of a female character so that way I could be respectful to the girls as well. But yeah, there were definitely some great characters that I enjoyed playing as growing up in the kid. And, as years went on, we started to see less and less of backyard sports, and people would always talk about it, but there actually have been some YouTube users or people that do live stream. They would, play old games, and they just kind of do like a simulation version of each of those games, just kind of talking about it, playing those games, bringing some great memories. Well, as it turns out, backyard sports is actually returning, and I gotta tell you what, I am really excited about this because, backyard sports, there has been definitely a love for that. I know the Kelsey brothers were talking about, playing that game, but yeah, it's really nice, like on their podcast, but really great to hear that backyard sports is coming back, and I'm really looking forward to possibly getting my hands on another opportunity to play that game as well. So yeah, you've got Pablo Sanchez, Stephanie Morgan. Now that's a name that I was thinking about on the game. But Pablo Sanchez, Stephanie Morgan, Kenny Gawaguchi, Pete Wheeler, and Reese Worthington and Dmitry Petrovic and everything, and just so on and so forth. I mean, there's just a lot of great kids. But yeah, if you guys want to understand what Backyard Sports was, feel free to go watch like YouTube clips or maybe do a little research on on the old games and everything. And I know there was a video that Secret Base did where they talked about how significant was Pablo Sanchez because he was like the MVP, like the best athlete, a best all-around athlete. Like they talked about how dominant was he in each of the sports games. He was pretty dominant in, like, he was the best athlete in baseball and in football. Basketball, he was kind of all right. Like, he was near the top. His inside shooting game was not that great. But then you throw in soccer and then hockey, where he was, like, near the top of that as well. So, on a consistent basis, Pablo Sanchez was the best athlete. And he has been, without question, maybe the best animated character in terms of video game sports, for that matter. So, looking forward to seeing more highlights of that as well. Definitely bringing up some great memories. And I gotta say this, and this might be an unpopular opinion from my other podcast, Two Pals on a Pod with Mark T. Robinson, which we should have an episode coming up later on. But I really think that Disney, Nickelodeon, or Fox, Cartoon Network, they had missed out on a big opportunity to turn the Backyard Sports video games into like a cartoon series. Now, I know it's probably going to be tough because you're talking about an animated show based on a video game, and maybe people might not have that same nostalgic feeling as that, but I just think that was a big missed opportunity to maybe see the characters in action, to say the least. So I think it was definitely a huge miss for Backyard Sports to not have a series of them. So that being said, we are now going to get ready to move on and talk about my predictions for the upcoming NFL season. Who's going to win the divisions, or each division, who might be a close second place, and then my picks for award winners and such. And then also I'll throw in my bold claims throughout the entire process. So stay tuned, folks. We will be right back in just a moment. Okay, everyone, it's time now for my predictions for this upcoming season. Now, what I've decided to do is I am going to look at every division, NFC and AFC, and I'm going to be discussing who I think will be winning the division, and also if there's a second place team that could potentially win but also make the playoffs. So, for example, let's say that I'm just throwing out a narrative here. Let's say that for the NFC East, the division I'm going to start with, I'm going to pick, I would say, the Washington Commanders. Now, trust me on this one, folks. I'm not picking the Commanders to win a division, although it would be surprising if they did. But I'm saying that the Washington Commanders would win the division, in my personal opinion, give out my reasons why, and then I would throw in another team that I think would win the division for this upcoming season, i.e. the New York Giants. Not that I'm picking them to win it as well, but also why I think they have a legitimate case to be a playoff team. I'll throw in some pros and cons here and there, and bear in mind, I do have 5 bold predictions for this season. So, with that being said, let's get right into it. So, starting off with the NFC East. I used the Commanders and the Giants as an example, but that's not going to be the case. I'm going to be picking the Philadelphia Eagles to win the NFC East. I think right now, you look at the NFC East, it's becoming a bit of a 2-horse race between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, last year, the Eagles started off as one of the strongest, if not the strongest team in all of the NFC or in the NFL. Keep in mind that they did lose the last Super Bowl to the Kansas City Chiefs prior to last season. So they got off to a really great start. They were like 10-1 at one point. Jalen Hurts was playing at an MVP type level. And I'm really disappointed that he didn't win the MVP the previous year. But he looked like a guy that was going to lead the Eagles to, win the division. Well, they did win the division, but the way they finished that season sort of kind of teetered down the stretch, and it was just not a great look for the Philadelphia Eagles. They were able to end up going to the wild card game where they ended up losing to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Baker Mayfield. And Jason Kelce, the longtime longtime offensive lineman for the Philadelphia Eagles, announced his retirement. So one Kelce brother is still in the NFL as of now. But, this is a case where I think the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be able to finish strong. They're going to bounce back. And I can see Philadelphia going 12-5. I think they'll win all but one of their games in their division. One game, of course, one loss being against the Dallas Cowboys, which we'll get more into in just a moment. And so, I think Philadelphia sort of kind of struggled over the last few seasons. Like Vic Fangio was defensive coordinator for the team, and he would always have his defensive units in the top 10, but I think maybe because of the new system and also because of the lack of, just the struggles down the stretch. I mean, Philadelphia went 1-6 in their last 7 games to end up in the wild card. So I think Philadelphia will still be a team to look out for in the NFC East. I think this is still their division, but I'm not saying this is going to be another 10-year run. I think Dallas could be a team that would be of interest for the NFC East. Now, the Cowboys have kind of been making headwaves in the offseason just for the moves that they have not been able to make. There's obviously a lot of issues going on. I mean, Dak Prescott, this is basically a hit or miss year for him. If he doesn't perform up to standards, he's no longer the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, I believe, as well. And, I need to go back to Philadelphia real fast. I almost forgot the Eagles added to their offense with Saquon Barkley for the running back game. That's right. They took a division opponent, Saquon Barkley, from the Giants now to the Philadelphia Eagles. He should be a really great use to that Eagles squad. He is arguably one of the top 5 best running backs in the game, if not the best running back in the NFL up to this point. And I think Philadelphia will be able to use him well, take a little bit of pressure off of Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith in the passing game, because I think Philadelphia's running game is really, I think they really needed some massive improvements, and they were able to get a guy like that. Now, you just have to hope that if you're Philly, Saquon Barkley doesn't struggle, doesn't go down the tube, if you will. Like, he has a bit of a down year where, he might not be able to match his rushing yards per total with the Giants, or, he might get injured and everything. You just hope that that doesn't happen. But I think as long as Barkley is okay, Philadelphia should be among the top teams in the NFC. Now, back to Dallas. The Cowboys have made a lot of news for moves that they haven't made. Right now, there's that CeeDee Lamb issue where there hasn't been any talks of any contracts, although Jerry Jones has recently stated that it is likely that the potential for some promising talks are being made. So I definitely want to see how that plays out, because I feel like the Cowboys cannot be in the same predicament here. I feel like the Cowboys want to have a chance to make the playoffs and really show that they can win this season. But the problem, though, is like they always find a way to choke in the postseason. Like every year, it's the same situation. This is our year. We're going to do great. And then, we're off to a great start, best team. And then, oh, no, we suck. We're struggling. And we made the playoffs. And then, oh, no, we lost. We didn't even get to the NFC Championship game and all that. So, yeah. But, actually, the Cowboys did win the division last year. I know they're going to want to throw that at me. They did win the NFC East division. But how did that work out for them? Not too good. So, yeah, they lose to the Green Bay Packers, who were the 7th seed, mind you, with Jordan Love, and it just seems like the Packers have built this nice permanent base home in Arlington, where I feel like Green Bay has won every game in Cowboy Stadium, although there may have been a game or so where they might have lost in between. But either way, the Packers own the Cowboys in Arlington. So, that's going to be a big question for Dallas, because right now you got a quarterback who, I like Dak Prescott as a person, don't get me wrong, but he hasn't been able to live up to the standards of the Dallas Cowboys position. As a matter of fact, I would say outside the President of the United States, which there's going to be an election for this upcoming year, being the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys might be the hardest job in all the world, because there's a lot of media attention on you. You have this blue star. You have to live up to that of Roger Staubach and Troy Aikman and Tony Romo, even though he didn't win a Super Bowl. So the Cowboys clearly are, in a bit of a predicament with Dak Prescott. But then you have CeeDee Lamb, has not had his contract, and of course I mentioned earlier there's been some talks going on between the two. The only true presence that might keep the Cowboys at bay is Micah Parsons, and Micah Parsons, definitely a great linebacker for the team. And I just think, with Parsons, if you're not going to be able to help build around him, if you're going to be just continuing to, put together all these mediocre seasons, he's going to be out the door for sure. But yeah, it is definitely interesting to see how the Cowboys will be able to finish in the NFC East. And then, of course, Mike McCarthy, he's in the hot seat again. I think if Mike McCarthy doesn't get the Cowboys to the NFC Championship at least, let alone the Super Bowl, he's out. He's fired. Bill Parcells couldn't get the job done. Mike McCarthy, another Super Bowl coach, he couldn't get the job done. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the NFC East division. Now, I know that the Washington Commanders are definitely going to be another team to look out for because of Jaden Daniels, if you will. But this is where I truly think that he might get the Commanders into a position where they might push for the NFC East, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. They'll probably be missing out by a couple of games, though I would not be surprised if Washington has found their answer at the quarterback position. So, going to be interesting. I got Philadelphia and Dallas representing as the top two teams in the NFC East, and I think both teams will make the playoffs. Moving on now to the NFC North, and this is the division that I think is going to be the toughest division, or the closest division. Well, here's the thing. Before J.J. McCarthy went out for the Minnesota Vikings, I thought that all four of these teams had very capability of at least showing signs of improvement, maybe making a push for the NFC North. But with McCarthy out, I don't know if the Vikings can be able to maintain their ability to bounce back after a very tough season where things just didn't go right for them. And then with Kirk Cousins out of the picture, so I don't know if they can be able to sustain that way. But anyways, I think we're going to be in for a 3-team horse race. And I think that the Detroit Lions will be, I think they're going to be at least number 2 as far as, my top 2 teams in the NFC North. The hardest part for me is that Detroit, they have a tougher schedule. I think it's easy for everybody to think that when you win a division, like when you're a surprising team that wins a division, you're going to be talked about as, hey, you might be that next great team. You might have a legitimate chance to, make some noise here. You could be a Super Bowl caliber team. And this is a team that I really think is. But the problem, of course, is when you look at the schedule. I mean, you start off with the Rams. You got the Bucks and the Cardinals. I mean, okay, the Buccaneers and the Rams, that's 2 playoff teams you eliminated. So you could be going 1-1 or 0-2, even though you're hosting both those games, considering that the Rams and the Buccaneers are 2 teams that are wanting to get some revenge on you as well. But then you have, of course, a stretch where you're playing against, you have a couple of games that in there that you're probably going to pick up and win. But I think Detroit might be the favorite to win the NFC North Division. However, this is where I think I'm having a little trouble trying to pick the Lions, to win the NFC North. I think the Green Bay Packers are going to be the team that's going to maybe make that next leap. Like the Packers finished as a seventh seed in the NFC, but they had a very strong finish to their season. Like they were arguably the hottest NFC team, and they had a big win over the Dallas Cowboys, and they kept that momentum going for 3 quarters against the 49ers before the Niners came back to win. But I think Jordan Love is probably the next great Packers quarterback that could follow in the footsteps of Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. And I really think Green Bay is a team that is definitely going to be, an underrated team to watch in the NFC. But I think they're going to be able to make that next step. Most experts have them winning at least 9 games. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to say they're going to win about 10 games or so, maybe 11. I think they'll probably take 1 game away from the Lions if all goes right for them. It should be a real interesting situation with them. So as far as I'm concerned, I think the Packers might edge out the Lions, or it could be a situation where both teams are tied with identical records. But moving on, we have the Chicago Bears, who everyone is kind of, going to be curious to watch because of Caleb Williams. Chicago has had people that say, well, they'll make the playoffs, or they're actually going to come up short by 1 game. And one of my bold predictions, I actually have the Bears missing out on the playoffs by 1 game. Now, the reason why I say that is because Caleb Williams is now going to be at the center of the forefront of a rookie class that has the opportunity to duplicate what C.J. Stroud did last year. C.J. Stroud changed the way people look at rookie quarterbacks. Now, mind you, there have been some great rookie quarterbacks before, like Ben Roethlisberger, just to name one of them. But what Stroud did last year with all the rookie records and everything, he has set a bar. He's proven to be an exception for everyone, how they value rookie quarterbacks as quarterbacks that are just learning the system, quarterbacks that are taking, making an opportunity to step forward in the game. They're not looking at these quarterbacks as impactful players right away to help lead them on a big run to the playoffs like Stroud did as well. Now, yes, Ben Roethlisberger led the Steelers to the AFC Championship game. Robert Griffin III, who unfortunately ended his career as a bust, and that's hard for me to say as a Baylor alumnus, but he did lead the Washington Commanders, then known as the Redskins, to the playoffs. But I think the problem with Caleb Williams is there's going to be a lot of hype around him that he can duplicate what Stroud did, and you're playing in the NFC North, which is a very tough division, and I just have a hard time seeing the Bears, in the playoffs. I do think they make the leap. I do think they improve. I think they just miss out on 1 game. Yes, they have one of the easiest strength of schedules in the NFL, which should help them, but don't expect them to turn it up a notch and win the division. Because you look at what the Texans did last year compared to the Bears, the Texans were more likely to win the AFC South division last year than the Bears are to win the NFC North division this year. So I think Chicago will be a great threat, but I just have a hard time seeing them in the playoffs. So I'm going to say the Packers 1 and the Lions at number 2. Now we move on to the NFC South division. And this is kind of the biggest sleeper division. This is one of the hardest divisions for me because, you look at what's down there. The Buccaneers won the division last year with Baker Mayfield and company. The Carolina Panthers were supposed to have a great season, but Bryce Young was not that, had a terrible year at rookie season, whether it was because of coaching or the general management that just couldn't help him out. They've gotten some pieces to help Bryce Young, but I'm just not sure if he can be able to elevate himself to what he was supposed to be. And it's not because of his size. It's just, the system that he's a part of. And then you look at the Atlanta Falcons. They got Kirk Cousins. And it's going to be a curious division. This might be the only division that I can honestly say that the winner might have a losing record. But with that being said, I think the Atlanta Falcons are definitely going to make a big step, and I think they're going to turn it around to win the division. Kirk Cousins was signed to a massive free agent contract, and then, of course, they kind of screwed things up by drafting Michael Penix out of Washington, where they already used Kirk Cousins. Now, I think the biggest problem, though, was they don't want to have a situation where you put a quarterback in there that was lousy, because that was one of the reasons why they struggled last year. So they bring in Kirk Cousins, who obviously is there to be the starting quarterback, but now has an opportunity to tutor Michael Penix to where by the time Cousins leaves, he'll be ready to go. Penix, that is. And clearly, this is an opportunity that I see for Atlanta, making a big step to win the division, if you will. The second team that I have as a winner is obviously the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They finished 9-8 last season. They were able to get to the divisional round, and they almost actually beat the Lions in the playoffs. But, Baker Mayfield seems to have turned the corner, because there was a period there where Mayfield was expected to be the great starter for the Cleveland Browns, but then they kind of went behind his back and they sent him down to Carolina. Then he goes to the Rams, and now he's with the Buccaneers. And I have great respect for Baker Mayfield, even though I'm not particularly a huge fan of his, just because of some personal things, and which I won't get into. But without question, Baker Mayfield is the guy, and for Tampa Bay. And then he still has Mike Evans, which is pretty pivotal. But Mike Evans is approaching the point where he's about to start the decline of his career. And this is why I feel that the Buccaneers might be an equal team to win the NFC South division. But I think it's going to come down to which team can be able to utilize their new addition or their weapons. If the Atlanta Falcons can be able to have that stable quarterback situation, which they were lacking in the previous year, or will it be just the experience of winning the division from last year that will help the Buccaneers? Or will they be just a once-in-a-lifetime, division winner? But we'll just have to wait and see for the NFC South. So for that, I have the Atlanta Falcons winning the division for now, and then I have the Buccaneers as a close second. And let me go back real fast. NFC North, I do have both the Packers and the Lions making the playoffs. And as far as this division, I think the Falcons will be the only team to make the division. So now we move on to the final NFC division, the NFC West. And to tell you the truth, the 49ers are still the top team in the NFC West, though they do have a little bit of an issue with the whole Brandon Ayuk situation. And I know that he has been linked to some teams, the Steelers being one, or possibly the Patriots, though, and the Browns, but he has rejected those two claims. Now, it does seem like they are, it's probably likely that they're going to have to renegotiate some contract, because it seems like they're running out of trade options, for a guy that obviously was supposed to be a big impactful piece for them, but unfortunately has not been able to, has not gotten what he's wanted. And I think part of the problem is, with Deebo Samuel and George Kittle kind of leading the receiving core for the 49ers, especially with Brock Purdy as a quarterback, that's going to be hard for someone like him to find out. This whole thing with Brandon Ayuk kind of makes me think of like a number 2 receiver who thinks he's supposed to be the number 1 receiver, but maybe he just doesn't realize that that's where he's supposed to be. Or maybe he wants to prove he's number 1 receiver, wants the opportunity, but right now there doesn't seem to be any movement as far as where he's going to go, as far as whether he's going to stay in San Francisco or whether he's going to be going to another team. But even with all of that, I still think the 49ers are a strong team. Now, I know they just lost the Super Bowl, and it's definitely hard for most teams to get back the following year after losing a Super Bowl, even though the Patriots proved it can be done. I think the 49ers are still that strong team in the NFL, and they're obviously under the most pressure because they haven't won a Super Bowl in the Kyle Shanahan era, and that's something that is going to be a big concern for San Francisco fans. Like, if the 49ers don't win, like, if they get back to the Super Bowl and they lose, they're the 21st century version of the Buffalo Bills. Let's just be honest. Or maybe the Denver Broncos before John Elway finally won his first Super Bowl. So, yeah, I think the 49ers definitely have a lot of pressure on them to try to win the NFC or win the Super Bowl or get back to the Super Bowl. But, yeah, there's definitely going to be a lot of that pressure for the time being. But I think the 49ers are still the team to beat. I would say a close second place would have to be the LA Rams. Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp are still obviously at the forefront, but you throw in a guy like Puka Nakua and Kyron Williams, the Rams have a receiving core that definitely could match up well with the 49ers, if not be better. And, I definitely like what I'm seeing from the Rams at this point to try to hold down the fort and maybe give Matthew Stafford another opportunity to pick up a second Lombardi here. So, to tell you the truth, it's definitely going to be a tough division from the NFC West. I mean, when the 49ers, you have George Kittle, you have Deebo Samuel, and Christian McCaffrey. Now, let's not forget about him. He's like a great running back who really carried that Niners offense for most of the season, and was in the conversations for MVP for a while there. But it's going to be a very tough division. I think both the Rams and the Niners will make the playoffs with the Niners winning the division. So, with that being said, going over the NFC predictions once again, the Eagles, Cowboys in the East. I got the Packers and the Lions in the NFC North. The Falcons will be the only South winner that will make the playoffs, and then the 49ers and Rams will make the playoffs as well in the NFC. So that's my NFC predictions. We'll step aside for a moment, and we'll talk about my AFC predictions. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. I talked about how my predictions were that the Cowboys were still going to make the playoffs despite the fact that there was that whole CeeDee Lamb situation. But as it turns out, as of this podcast, that situation has been resolved. CeeDee Lamb has agreed to terms on a 4-year, $136 million deal that now makes him the second highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. And I gotta say, I mean, if I were the Cowboys, I'm glad that we at least got a receiver that we really needed to have on a team. But I'm still, in this day and age where people are getting overpaid, and look, you're gonna have to make some overpayments to athletes if you want to keep them as well. Justin Jefferson, obviously is an option there, and I think you're gonna have some wide receivers that are definitely going to get overpaid. I think the non-quarterback position is definitely going to be one to watch when it comes to players that are going to be overpaid. Now it's just a matter of, okay, who's going to top CeeDee Lamb in terms of the marketing aspects of all that, or the financial aspects into contracts. But CeeDee Lamb has since re-signed, renegotiated his contract, actually agreed to a 4-year deal for $136 million. So, yeah, for the next 4 years, he's going to be a top target for Dak Prescott. That is, of course, if Dak Prescott can continue or can elevate himself into a greater quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. So, with that being said, it's time now for my AFC predictions. Yes, the American Football Conference. I talked about the NFC in the previous segment. It's now time for me to talk about the AFC East. And, folks, this is going to be a very interesting conference to watch when you're talking about all 4 divisions, because I feel like, with the exception of one, the 3 other divisions are definitely going to be the most watched divisions. Very competitive, hard fought in a way. So, I'll start with the AFC East, and I know the Buffalo Bills are still a team that is very much going to be threats to win the AFC East, even in spite of the fact that they don't have Stephon Diggs, they don't have Gabe Davis and all that. but they do have a new wide receiver in Keon Coleman, and I really think that the Buffalo Bills are still going to be a threat to win, but at the same time, the question is for how long? I mean, Sean McDermott, he has not been able to get his team over the hump. I mean, Josh Allen, he's a great quarterback, but he has not elevated himself to Patrick Mahomes-like status. Like the Bills, they've only been to one AFC Championship game in this so-called dominant era, and since then they have not even made the AFC Championship game. They haven't even gone to the Super Bowl. You can argue that if Buffalo continues to go down this trend, they might be the AFC version of what the Dallas Cowboys are, and that's a stretch to say because Dallas has had more disappointing heartbreaks and not reaching the NFC Championship game. But Buffalo, they're not at that level yet, but if they continue this trend for a number of years, yeah, you can argue that the Buffalo Bills are the Dallas Cowboys equivalent as well. But with that being said, I think the Bills are still going to be the best team in the AFC East. Now, I don't know if they're going to be as dominant as they were in years past because, again, one of the reasons why Stephon Diggs left the Bills was the fact that when the Bills started the season last year, he was their go-to guy. He was their offense. He was really a dominant star player, having another outstanding season despite all this off-field situations that was happening. The problem was the Bills just weren't that good. Then they decide, okay, we're going to change our offense a bit. We're going to start running the ball, and that actually worked out well. It did cost Stephon Diggs an opportunity to shine in elements, and yes, unfortunately he did have a moment where he dropped what would have been a go-ahead, big-time. Well, I'm not sure it would have been a touchdown pass, but it would have been a big reception that would have put the Bills probably in position to score the touchdown and not have to worry about kicking a field goal. But in a way, I do think the Buffalo Bills are still going to be the team to beat in the AFC East. But I also think the Miami Dolphins are going to be a threat as well. Tua Tagovailoa, again, having himself a real strong, like a guy that has an opportunity to elevate himself to an even greater quarterback. I know last year the Dolphins season unfortunately came to an end in the freezing cold up in Kansas City, but I think Miami will definitely be a threat to win the AFC East. I mean, they were in a very good position to win the division until Buffalo overtook them, and that's what led to AFC making it the AFC East being Buffalo at the number 2 spot, and then, of course, Miami having to deal with the number 7. So even though I think the Buffalo Bills will probably still win the AFC East division, I just think that the Miami Dolphins are going to be a stronger team. Now, most people will probably want to talk about the New York Jets. Aaron Rodgers having an opportunity to come back for the team. They're saying, well, a healthy Aaron Rodgers, he'll lead the Jets to potentially make the AFC East, make the playoffs. Maybe not the AFC East division, but an opportunity for the Jets to really do something special. Well, here's the thing. I think it's really, I just don't see that happening. I think Aaron Rodgers, look, he's a great quarterback, and I think if he has a healthy season, he'll make the Jets an interesting team to watch, but I just don't think it's going to be as efficient. Because the problem now is, can he stay healthy, or is he going to have to deal with these unmet expectations? I mean, Aaron Rodgers, you don't want to say he's on a bit of a downfall, but he's kind of starting to head in that direction as a downfall. So with that being said, of course, my predictions for the AFC East, I have the Buffalo Bills winning that division. The second place team, another option team, are the Miami Dolphins, who could win the division as well. Now we go to the AFC North. In my opinion, out of all the AFC divisions, the AFC North is probably going to be the most competitive one. You have the Baltimore Ravens with Lamar Jackson coming off an MVP season, reaching the AFC Championship game, but didn't really do well. Didn't do much of anything against the Kansas City Chiefs, and that was a horrible game. If you were a Ravens fan, not a great game to watch. Then you have the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals missed the playoffs last year, but they were only one game out of what would have been the third place spot in that division. They would have probably had Pittsburgh spot at least. But I think the Cincinnati Bengals are definitely going to, have a better season because Joe Burrow with his new Eminem-like hairstyle is officially coming back. Looking to bounce back after that horrific injury and maybe remind fans that, hey, Cincinnati is a threat to Kansas City to win the AFC championship for that matter. So I think the Cincinnati Bengals will be a team to watch. The Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm having a hard time seeing this quarterback situation between Justin Fields and Russell Wilson work out. I think that's going to be a bit of a problem unless Mike Tomlin decides, hey, I need to stick with one quarterback, and whether it's Fields or whether it's Wilson, they're going to have to, the other's going to have to accept the fact that they're going to be backup quarterbacks. And I just think Russell Wilson, I don't know why he would get Russell Wilson when you also traded for Justin Fields, unless the option is to have Russell Wilson start, then you throw in Justin Fields for that matter. But I think the Steelers quarterback situation is really going to, hurt them in a sense. It may give them a winning season, but I don't know if it'll be good enough to make the playoffs. And as far as the Cleveland Browns are concerned, yes, they still have Myles Garrett and a defense that potentially could look to be among the best this year. But then, of course, there's the whole Deshaun Watson situation. And Watson, I'll say this, he hasn't really elevated himself to what he was in Houston, and I don't think he will ever get to that level, but I don't think he's not going to be, I'm not saying he's going to be a disaster of a player for the Cleveland Browns. I mean, he hasn't really lived up to the hype as much. He's had some moments, but it just hasn't quite worked out well for him, and I'm just having a hard time seeing the Browns really be much of anything with Watson in particular. Now, last year they had 4 quarterbacks that somehow got the Browns to the playoffs. I'll tip my hat to them as well. It was really their defense that carried them. But, yeah, the Cleveland Browns, to me, that's a team that I'm not sure that might be able to make the playoffs. So with that being said, I think the Ravens will win the division again, but I think they're going to win by 1 game. I think Lamar Jackson still has something to prove. Yes, he won a second MVP, but it's now a question of, can he be the guy to elevate himself to get his team to the Super Bowl? I said this on my other podcast. I think Lamar Jackson is slowly turning into the Dak Prescott of the AFC. Now, what I mean by that is Prescott has had some great regular season numbers. In fact, the guy should at least be in the MVP conversation at some times. But when it comes to the playoffs, he underperforms. Now, I will say that even though he had a playoff win against the Texans, the stats they put up in that game were just kind of average, if you will. I mean, you look at his stats from the Texans game. 16 completed passes on 22 attempts, 72.7%, 152 yards, 2 touchdown throws. I mean, okay, that's not bad for a quarterback, but I feel like, and it was a 34-10 win, but keep in mind, the Texans were tied with the Ravens at halftime, and they were only down 7 at the end of the third quarter before the Ravens pulled away. If you're talking about a blowout type of win, you want to really see him put up some great numbers. Now, the next game against the Chiefs, he did well. 20 of 37 for 272 yards passing, but 1 touchdown and 1 interception, and he was sacked 4 times. He was sacked 7 times in those 2 games, which, you're going to get sacked a number of times. That's just going to happen. But I feel like Lamar Jackson underperforms in the playoffs. And his reputation is he is, a guy. I mean, you look at his career in the playoffs to this point, 75.7%, 1324 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. So, yeah, he's kind of putting up Dak Prescott-like numbers in the playoffs. And that's not good for someone that's won 2 MVPs in the NFL. But I still think Lamar Jackson has something to prove. I think the Ravens will win the division, but I'm not counting out the Cincinnati Bengals, especially with Joe Burrow, although I do wonder if Cincinnati will be able to bounce back from their disappointing ability to miss the playoffs by 1 game. So it's going to be real interesting to see. But now we move on to the AFC South. And people might think that the AFC South is a foregone conclusion in that the Houston Texans are going to win this division pretty much, but I'm not so sure it's going to be a dominant performance. I don't think you're going to see the Texans go 14-3 type. Like they'll win the division by 4 games. I think it's going to be a really close division. I think the Texans and the Indianapolis Colts will be a big factor. Now, one of the reasons why this rivalry is kind of starting to heat up more is because, yeah, the Texans won the division, but in their first game against the Colts, which, again, they were a young team, they were still trying to figure things out, and Stroud was still getting used to the NFL, they played Anthony Richardson. And before Richardson went down in that game, he actually was outperforming C.J. Stroud. So there is this big mystery as to what if Richardson had finished the game and finished the season. Would we be looking at C.J. Stroud as the Rookie of the Year, or would we be looking at Anthony Richardson as maybe the Rookie of the Year? I mean, I don't know. And the fact that it came down to the wire the last game, even though Richardson wasn't starting, there might be a sense that Anthony Richardson could have been the guy that led the Colts to a division and eliminated the Texans from the playoffs, but you just don't know. Like, you don't know if that was going to be the case. Anthony Richardson didn't even have a full season, so now he's getting an opportunity to potentially play a full season, and that is something that the Colts obviously want to keep an eye out for as well. Now, what about the Jacksonville Jaguars? Obviously, the Jaguars, the reason why we were talking about the Texans and the Colts is because the Jaguars were sitting at 8-3. They were in first place. They were sitting pretty. 8-3, first place in the AFC South Division. This is their division for the take-in, and they drop 5 of their last 6 games, which is really unfortunate, to say the least. I mean, that is one of the biggest choke jobs. Well, I wouldn't say it's the biggest choke job as far as teams that start off well and then all of a sudden falter down the stretch. But, man, Jacksonville, you were supposed to be the media darlings entering last season. You had Trevor Lawrence. You had all these great guys, and you blew it. Now, all of a sudden, you kind of lost that luster because everyone's starting to talk about the Texans. They're starting to talk about the Colts. They're putting them over you in a way. But I think Jacksonville will still be a team to watch out for in the AFC South Division. Then we have the Tennessee Titans. Now, I think the Titans will probably be a sleeper team, but again, the situation with them is how good can Will Levis be? Will Levis with his cologne commercial in a way, that thing was just kind of crazy, if you will. But I just think the problem with the Titans is they don't have Derrick Henry anymore. Their offense is going to probably take a hit. They still have, DeAndre Hopkins. Can Will Levis be able to get himself to, lead the Titans to the playoffs team or to the playoffs? And I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I think it's going to really be a telltale sign for how well the Tennessee Titans can be, because I feel like the Titans might be the team that will be able to finish last in their division. So I'm just having a hard time seeing the Titans as a team that can really make some noise in the playoffs. I think Tennessee misses the playoffs. I think all 3 teams in the Texans, the Colts, and the Jaguars will make the playoffs. But if I were to say my top 2 teams, I'm going to say Houston for now. I'm not trying to be biased because I think most people would probably pick the Texans to win the AFC South. But I also think the Colts should be a team to watch out for as the number 2 team. So I think it'll be the Texans, the Colts, and the Jaguars in that order. And I wouldn't be surprised if all 3 teams were to make the playoffs, although I probably would say the Jaguars might be the 7th seed at best, based on the 3-team performance. And that brings me to the AFC West. And, again, it's kind of like the NFC West situation. This is really a Kansas City Chiefs-dominated division, and who can blame the Chiefs? They have obviously been the class of the NFL, winning 3 Super Bowls to hedge their name as a dynasty. Someone that knows a thing or two about that. Yeah, we definitely have the same things in common, but, well, not as far as the NFL goes. Anyway, I think the AFC West, it should still be a Kansas City Chiefs division. I think the Chiefs are going to have the mainstay on that. There may be a year or so where they may fall off and, they'll lose the division and everyone's thinking, oh boy, there comes another team that's going to take over. But then they'll bounce back and it's like, did you miss us for whatever reason? Yeah. So I think the Kansas City Chiefs will win the AFC West division. Now, I think the second place team, this is a tough one because I know the Denver Broncos acquired Bo Nix and they seem to really like him after his preseason performances, but I think the Broncos will probably miss the playoffs, and that's going to be tough to say. I think Bo Nix will definitely be a favorite to win Rookie of the Year, or one of the favorites to win Rookie of the Year, even though, in my personal opinion, I think Caleb Williams might be able to win this division, or win Rookie of the Year. But going back to the AFC West, I think the second place team, or the team that might win the AFC West, if not Kansas City, would be the Los Angeles Chargers. Justin Herbert has not been able to elevate himself after winning Rookie of the Year a couple of years ago. He now gets an opportunity to do so with Jim Harbaugh, who is fresh off winning a national championship for Michigan, and of course has a 4-year show cause from all this stuff, the situation in Michigan. It has nothing to do with the sign stealing and everything, but it's really a recruiting violation or so. And because of that, Jim Harbaugh will not be able to coach in college unless, of course, somebody were to hire. Like, let's say if he gets fired after a few years and a college team tries to contact him, they can hire him, but he would have to miss an entire season in that 4-year stretch. So I think Jim Harbaugh is aware of the fact that he's probably not going to go back to college for some time, but he's now getting an opportunity to come back to the NFL, maybe follow in the footsteps of Pete Carroll, who had a couple of stints before in the NFL that didn't go too well, goes back to college, wins a couple of natties at USC. I still call them a couple of natties, even though the record books say that they only won one because the other one was stripped for reasons involving Reggie Bush and all that money stuff, which, come on. I think Reggie Bush is glad. I'm glad Reggie Bush got his Heisman Trophy moment. But I'm rambling on a bit, I know. But I think Jim Harbaugh is going to come back. I think he's going to do wonders for the Chargers. I don't see them winning the division. I just think it's going to be really hard for the Chargers to, overtake the Kansas City Chiefs. But I think the Chargers will finish second. I'm sort of in a bit of a toss-up between the Raiders and the Denver Broncos. Now, I want to say the Raiders finished third. The Raiders obviously had a bit of a struggle for most of the season, but they had a strong finish thanks to their interim head coach, Antonio Pierce, who has since been named the head coach of the team. Then, of course, you had Gardner Minshew, who they acquired, and Minshew, who was with the Colts, led them to a situation where they could have won the last game and gone to the playoffs, but they didn't. So Gardner Minshew is the quarterback of the Raiders, and here's a guy that has really had an interesting tale for his journeys around the NFL, and I think Gardner Minshew, based on the experience, will certainly play a big factor. But a few years ago, we looked at the AFC West as probably the most competitive division because of all the quarterbacks involved. Well, obviously that has no longer been the case, and I think the Raiders will definitely will finish third. But my top two teams for the AFC West will have to be the Kansas City Chiefs and the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, I personally think that Kansas City will finish with the best record. Second place will probably go, I'm going to make a bold prediction and say it's going to be the Texans that will finish with the second best record, just edging out the Ravens, even though I might say the Ravens could beat the Texans in that one game. And then Buffalo takes the 4th seed as well. The 3 other teams that will make the playoffs will be the Cincinnati Bengals, the Miami Dolphins, and I'm going to say the Indianapolis Colts. So, yeah, I think it's going to be that interesting playoff format situation. So, once again, I have the Kansas City Chiefs finishing first. I have the Texans finishing second. The Ravens will take the 3rd seed. 4th seed will go to the Buffalo Bills. Cincinnati takes the 5th seed. Miami will take the 6th seed. And then the 7th seed will belong to the Indianapolis Colts. So that's my predictions as far as the AFC is concerned. Now, real quick, before I, take off and end this episode, I want to give out my predictions for the awards as far as who I think will win what. I think for NFL Comeback Player of the Year, it's going to be Joe Burrow. I think Joe Burrow will bounce back after a tough injury. I think he won that award previously, after he started his rookie season and torn his ACL. Then the next year he leads the Bengals to the Super Bowl, so he won Comeback Player of the Year award, I think. So I think he'll win that. I think the Offensive Rookie of the Year is going to be Caleb Williams. Yes, I think Caleb Williams is probably going to be the Rookie of the Year. I mean, look, I can say Bo Nix, I can say Marvin Harrison Jr. from the Arizona Cardinals and all that, but I just have a gut feeling that it's going to be a really, Caleb Williams will definitely be the big factor for the Chicago Bears looking to make the most of that opportunity. Now, as far as NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year, this was a bit of a tough one. I had to kind of look at some, players just to kind of get a look at it. And I think for this occasion, I will probably say Defensive Rookie of the Year would probably have to be, get ready for this one, folks, Chop Robinson of the Miami Dolphins. Now, I know it's a little bit of a long shot because, lately what I've noticed is that they've always given Rookie of the Years to pass rushers, like guys that dominate, the line of scrimmage and rush the passer. Will Anderson was like that last year for the Texans. He won Rookie of the Year for Defensive Rookie of the Year. So I think it's probably going to be a continuation. Chop Robinson, cool name with the Miami Dolphins. I think he'll be a big factor, but you never know with that. As far as Defensive Player of the Year, I think it's going to be Micah Parsons for the Dallas Cowboys. Last year, he was nominated along with Max Crosby of the Raiders, TJ Watt for the Steelers, and Myles Garrett of the Browns, who ended up winning the award. So I think Micah Parsons will be the winner for Defensive Player of the Year, just for the fact that he ended up with 14 sacks last season, 28 assisted tackles for 64 combined tackles, and he's just a dominant force for that Cowboys team. I mean, you think about the great linebackers for the Dallas Cowboys, a couple that come to mind, Randy White probably is one of the first ones that comes to mind. DeMarcus Ware, another great player for them. And then Charles Haley, I know he was on the Cowboys for a while. He was on the 49ers and played for the Cowboys as well. But I think Micah Parsons has proven to be the next great Cowboys defensive player, and you just wonder if he can be able to lead that Cowboys team to take a little bit of pressure off of the Dak Prescott. I think Micah Parsons will win Defensive Player of the Year for the Cowboys. And I think for Offensive Player of the Year, I'm going to go with Tyreek Hill. Now, Tyreek Hill was the number one player of the season last year. Like the NFL 100, they always do this top 100, which like they have players vote for who they think is deserving to be the best player of last season and all of that. I mean, it's not like winning the MVP award, but I just think it's kind of lost its luster over the years. But last year, I think Tyreek Hill was named the number one player, and I think he's going to win Offensive Player of the Year for Miami. Now, of course, he lost out on the award to Christian McCaffrey, who obviously was very deserving of that, and McCaffrey might have been an MVP candidate. But I think Tyreek Hill will be able to elevate Miami, get them to potentially maybe a divisional round, although I might have said that they were going to be... No, actually, I think I had them as a 6th seed. So based on that, they would probably go to play Baltimore, which probably be a tough game, although it might be interesting to see how Miami will fare in a little bit of a warmer climate, even though Baltimore is a cold city in that regard. But yeah, I think Tyreek Hill will probably win the Offensive Player of the Year. I mean, last season, when you look at the guy's stats, almost 1,800 yards on 119 catches for 15.1 yards per reception, 13 touchdowns. It's just, the guy was really fast and everything. And yeah, he definitely has a lot to prove, especially now that the question of whether Tyreek Hill's absence will hinder the Kansas City Chiefs, and the answer has been proven to be no at this point. But I think Tyreek Hill will continue to find a way to elevate Miami. And last but certainly not least, MVP, bold prediction, CJ Stroud. I know some people have said that he will win the MVP, and then I know others will say that he probably won't, but I think this is the year that CJ Stroud elevates himself to that elite quarterback, that great quarterback. Now, the question is, will he get the Texans to the AFC Championship game, let alone the Super Bowl? And that's going to be a tough thing to figure out because the Texans have one of the hardest schedules in all of playoffs. Now, I said the Texans will win the division. I didn't think that I don't know if it's going to be a 14-3 situation. It may be 12-5 at best, but you never know with some of the games, especially in December down the stretch. But I do think that C.J. Stroud will be able to win the MVP. He's got a great receiving core around him. He's got, a coach who believes in him and, a fiery type of player. And he's just proven to be the best rookie quarterback up to this point. Barring any injury, hopefully that's not the case. But we could talk about Patrick Mahomes. We could talk about Lamar Jackson. Guys that are, threats to win the MVP. And always probably will be threats to win the MVP. Unless you throw in, Brock Purdy or Dak Prescott, again, I said that he probably should be a guy in the MVP conversation, but C.J. Stroud, even as a rookie last year, was considered an MVP candidate. Now, he wouldn't ultimately be a finalist for that award, but still, the fact that he was a rookie and he was in conversation for MVP, come on, that is something. I think C.J. Stroud will get an MVP award in the future, so he's my pick to win the MVP. And I actually have two more bold predictions. Now, I'm probably going to be wrong on these bold predictions. I'm not guaranteeing them. I know I have a guarantee out there on another podcast, which is still in effect, but I'm not going to go as far as to say this is a guarantee. But it is a bold prediction. And I have two bold predictions. Number one, the Kansas City Chiefs will not three-peat, because they will lose to the Texans in the AFC Championship game. And I know you're saying, whoa, wait a minute. First off, the Texans got to get to the AFC Championship game. They haven't even been there in their franchise history. And yes, you are absolutely right. But I feel like the Texans are getting close. I think they'll find a way to get over the hump to win the divisional round. Then they play Kansas City. Now, whether it's in Houston or whether it's in Kansas City, I know I had Kansas City finishing 1 over the Texans. I just think it's going to be hard for Kansas City to three-peat. Do I think they can? Yes. But do I think that's going to happen? No. I mean, you think about all the teams that have won back-to-back championships, whether they get to the NFC Championship game or AFC Championship game and they fall short to a team that is surprising and that has this surprising run and they knock them off. That happens. You think about the 49ers of the late 80s. They won back-to-back in 88 and 89. In 90, they had the lead late in the game. They were on the cusp of running out the clock, but then they fumbled the ball. The Giants picked it up. They drove down the field. They kicked the game-winning field goal, and they went on to win the Super Bowl that year. You think about the Cowboys of the 90s. 3 straight years they played the 49ers in the NFC Championship game. They won in 92 and 93. They won the Super Bowls those years. But they didn't win in 94 because they lost to the 49ers in the NFC Championship game. And then, of course, the Patriots in 03 and 04, they didn't even make I can't remember if they made the playoffs in 2005 or if they did. It was I think they made the playoffs in 2005 because it was so underrated. They definitely made the playoffs, but they lost in the wild card round to the Denver Broncos. It's hard to repeat as champions, folks. Or it's hard to three-peat, for that matter. That's why there's not that many back-to-back champions. So, Miami, they lost the divisional round game to the Raiders in 1974. Green Bay, they lost, back-to-back. Or they didn't even make it to the third straight Super Bowl just because Vince Lombardi had retired the previous year. So, all that being said, I think the Kansas City Chiefs will not be able to three-peat. But I think they'll have to earn their way. They'll prove to the team that will ultimately beat them, the Texans, that they're going to have to earn it. And I think the Texans will win the AFC Championship game this year. And as much as it's difficult for me to say this, the Texans, in my opinion, this year, and I hope I'm wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway, the Texans don't win the Super Bowl because they're going to run into the Detroit Lions, and the Lions are going to win. So, Detroit, Here's your Super Bowl prediction. You are going to win the Super Bowl. You're going to get past the 49ers in the NFC Championship game, and you are going to go all the way to win the big game down in New Orleans. Now, if I'm wrong, I will admit that I am wrong. Hopefully that, I'm wrong. But I'm making my bold predictions here. I'm trying to be professional. Detroit beats Houston in the Super Bowl. But don't worry, Texans fans. We're going to get that Super Bowl in down the stretch. It's just one of those things where we have to get there first and foremost. So with that being said, that is my predictions for this upcoming season. Thank you very much for listening in, and we hope you have yourselves a great day. Now, actually, before you do that, remember, we're going to put this podcast on my YouTube channel, KWC91, and we're also going to have it on Spotify and Podbean as well. So if you can listen in and watch it on YouTube as well. And folks, again, I'm going to try to keep putting out as much podcasts as I possibly can. But again, the schedule down here is kind of getting crazy, and it's definitely going to be a little bit of a hassle. I may only do like one every couple of weeks or so, or maybe once per month. But don't worry, folks. I'm going to try to put more of these out there. With that being said, thank you very much for tuning in. Hope to see you guys or hear from you guys later on down the line. Stay tuned, folks. We'll see you next time on Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock.